And this is the beginning of our question this afternoon. How can emotional truth-telling be a practice of liberation in our interior worlds? So in a patriarchal society, in a oppressive society that has everything to gain from our numbness, what does it mean to risk ourselves on feeling and feeling deeply and honestly? And how do we cultivate interior lives in resistance to this kind of established emotional hierarchy, an emotional hierarchy established by a historically numb society? How do we resist this? So emotional repression can happen if you've grown up in an environment where you weren't given much space to name or experience or express emotions. You may have been raised by primary caregivers who never expressed or displayed negative emotions themselves, or communicated things like, get on with it, stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Just be grateful, or very well intentioned. Don't be silly, everything's fine, or if you had an adult in your life who was kind of unable to regulate their own emotion altogether, who kind of overshared emotionally, had a lot of outbursts to the point where you maybe had to parent your parent. Children in those environments are more likely to grow up to be emotionally repressed in some way out of a sense of control or authority. Traumatic experiences result in this. So a child whose needs were ignored or neglected, if you're a child crying and there's nothing on the other end of the wail, if there's not consistent comfort or provision on the other end of that certainly forms us. And it's not uncommon in PTSD, racial PTSD, complex PTSD. And when I use language of emotional repression or emotional constriction, I just want to say, it's very different from apathy. I think most people hear it as that immediately, so I'll make that distinction. It's not an absence of emotion. So inside, you might be quite angry or sad, but you may be unable to express that or even recognize that in yourself. You might be completely unfamiliar with it. Now, I'll say this: emotional repression and constriction are really strategic tools of oppressive powers. If you and I are reduced to positive affect, if we are less capable of sensing pain and injustice, who does that benefit? Really think about that. And on the occasion you do sense it, those rare moments, someone possesses enough sense of self to name it, the powers that be can kind of wield this established emotional hierarchy against us, and tell us to calm down and be grateful. We live in the greatest country in the world, right? Be grateful. Oppressed peoples, which is many of us in different ways, I think have a calling to resist the formation of emotional repression and constriction in the world. Zora Neale Hurston said, "If you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it." Again, there are systems that have everything to gain from our numbness. So emotional truth-telling resists this. Emotional honesty reminds us that, actually we're worthy of being wept for, wept with, in a world where we're not always afforded the privilege of telling our own stories and telling them with the truth they deserve. Emotion is an honoring. It's a way of translating dignity in the wake of loss or suffering. Now, people who benefit from oppression, which is also many of us, have that same calling, but with a different reason. I think those who benefit from oppression possess inner worlds that are plagued by guilt. I think this is any oppressor's primary tormentor. So its only hope of being able to look at itself, its only hope of being able to as James Baldwin says, confront the tyranny of the mirror, is to practice this emotional repression, this emotional distancing. I think this is very true of white supremacy. I think white supremacy relies a lot on emotional repression to carry out its deeds. This is how it survives. This is how, well, yeah, I hope this isn't too jolting to hear, but it's emotional repression that allowed white men and white women and little white children to put on their Sunday's best and watch black bodies swing dead from trees, or tear black babies from their mothers on the auction block. I'm not really trying to be, jarring. I'm not even trying to be provocative. I say this to say that this runs deep. This emotional distancing is deeply ingrained, inherited repression that had a service. It was in service of something at some point. And so when we commit our spiritual lives to emotional truth-telling, we are slowly dismantling the delusion. And that's a powerful justice and liberation practice. In her essay, it's quite popular now, Poetry is Not a Luxury. Audre Lorde says, "The white fathers told us, 'I think, therefore I am.' The black mothers in each of us, the poet whispers in our dreams, 'I feel, therefore I can be free.'" And she also writes, "For within structures defined by profit, by linear power, by institutional dehumanization, our feelings were never meant to survive." She says, "Kept around as unavoidable adjuncts or pleasant pastimes, feelings were meant to kneel to thought as we were meant to kneel to men. But women have survived as poets." Now, I think it's worth naming, the tension and assigning, men as thinking creatures, women as feeling creatures. I am disinterested in that dichotomy. Personally, I reject it. And I think Lorde does too, in the context of her other work. But I think what Audre Lorde and others like her are getting at is a kind of subversion, this subversive refusal to divorce any one part of one's interior life from the rest. So in this case, the refusal to divorce one's emotions from the rest of their interior world. If Audre Lorde, say, was writing out of a society that demonized intellect instead, I can only suspect she would have something similar to say about, women surviving as thinkers and scientists. But that's not the story we're talking into. We have inherited a story of grave alienation of the emotional life, alienation of a robust emotional life in America. And this is not even to demonize the man who at the hands of the patriarchy, which by the way, does not care for men. It is not in service of the dignity of men. But this is nothing to say, or in no way to demonize the man who at the hands of the patriarchy cannot access his own interior world. I think Lorde, in her writing, demonstrates a really kind of startling compassion here. She says, "Men who are afraid to feel must keep women around to do their feeling for them, while dismissing us for the same supposedly inferior capacity to feel deeply." But she says, in this way also, men are denied their own essential humanity, becoming trapped in dependency and fear. A chained interior life for women, for men, for non-binary individuals alike, is a denial of humanity. To reclaim our interior worlds with emotional honesty, traveling into our emotions, it is costly, it's a costly practice, but it keeps us from drifting too far from our own humanity and the dignity of every person and piece of the cosmos.